A lot has been said and written about Donald Trump's performance at the second presidential debate. His body language toward his opponent, his sneering dismissal of her pain at the hands of an unfaithful husband, focusing instead on her alleged attacks on Bill Clinton's accusers. Among all the commentary, I was struck by the articulate way New York Magazine writer Rebecca Traister got to the heart of what made so many viewers so uncomfortable Sunday night. She did so in a thoughtful New York article, as well as on the MSNBC program All In with Chris Hayes, and I am happy that she was able to join us on State of Belief Radio. Rebecca, I know your time is tight, but thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me here.
You see sexism as an integral part of Trump's carefully crafted persona. Is that an accurate statement?
That's absolutely an accurate statement. It was always part of his persona as a celebrity. Even before he began to be a reality TV show star on The Apprentice, he spoke in interviews, whether with Howard Stern or in the magazine press, about his attitudes within his own marriage, about how women should do all the work of raising the children, how he wrote in his books about how it was dangerous to send a wife to work in terms of Ivana, his first wife's work within his company, and how that sort of ruined her as a wife. He spoke all the time, again, simply as a New York celebrity and a businessman, about women as pigs and dogs, and evaluated them on aesthetic and sexual scales, made very clear that his view of women was one in which their value was largely ornamental, was largely a reflection of his own male prowess. He certainly has never spoken about women as full human beings with a full set of ambitions, desires, priorities, or as worthy of his full and equal respect. He's never spoken about them that way. What's been interesting, in fact, is that he hasn't tempered any of that language as a presidential candidate. He's in fact, emphasized and doubled down on a lot of it.
So how does all of that translate into the way that we saw him treat Hillary Clinton in St. Louis?
Well, there are a couple of things. His interactions with Clinton have grown more and more aggressive. I think if you just look at the contrast between the first debate and the second, the first debate, he was aggressive and he sort of shouted at her and kept interrupting her and made a lot of faces. But it was after that debate when sort of everybody, I think in the media and certainly the polls reflected that everybody believed that she'd really beaten him. Mm-hmm. And for a man who has so effectively conveyed his view of male superiority over the years, to be beaten in such a big public contest by a woman, which, of course, this is a historic race. We have never been in a position where we've seen a woman trounce someone on a presidential debate stage before, because we've never seen a major party nominate a woman for the presidency before. So this is new for everyone. And so this man who has spoken so openly about his patriarchal belief system and the way in which he sees women, to be in some ways, to be beaten by a female opponent, I think enraged him in a way that is very specific to when gender power assumptions are upturned. And in the second debate, and especially after the release of this tape, which sort of just further emphasizes his view of women as objects for his use and at his disposal, he went in with such aggression toward Clinton. The way he followed her around the stage and sort of stood just behind her shoulder, it was very threatening to watch. He narrowed his eyes, and his tone of voice, instead of that sort of loud shouting, was much more menacing. You know, the clip where he says, "You'd be in jail," in this very dark, low, serious voice. All the fact that he chose to bring in a group of women who had complaints about this candidate's husband's past sexual misdeeds, and to bring those women into the debate hall, showed that he was looking to humiliate her. Donald Trump is not interested in the feminist argument about Bill Clinton's sexual misdeeds.
And is that what you? I'm sorry, but I interrupt. But is that what you? Because I was very interested in you saying that his attacks on Bill Clinton's behavior had nothing to do with feminism, and I think that's where you're going. I hope it is, because I'd like for you to talk more about that.
Well, we know that they have nothing to do with feminism because in the past he's on record, he's on tape, he at the time that women were bringing allegations against Bill Clinton, and I want to go back to those allegations in a second, but Donald Trump is on record saying that those women are, the group of them, including the ones he brought into the debate hall on Sunday night, are terrible people, are unattractive. He said those things about Paula Jones, about Juanita Broaddrick, the very women who he's now holding up as some sort of feminist argument against Hillary Clinton. Now, something that I have written and said before, which is that there is, of course, a feminist conversation to be had. And, you know, this country has been having it in various ways for many decades about Bill Clinton. And, you know, the allegations that have been brought up against him in the past. There is absolutely a feminist critique of Bill Clinton and, in fact, more broadly, of the behaviors of all kinds of men who have held outsized public and political power and have exercised outsized sexual power in possibly abusive ways. But Donald Trump, who called these particular women terrible people in the past, who on Friday was revealed to have talked about grabbing women against their will and assaulting them sexually, is certainly not the person who is interested in launching that feminist critique. Donald Trump is not a feminist.
Right.
He is using, in fact, the notion of feminist complaint and feminist critique of power imbalance as his excuse to humiliate the woman who's beating him for the presidency. Bringing those women in was meant to shame his opponent for the American presidency, to make her feel bad about herself, to remind America that her husband cheated on her, which I think in Donald Trump's view, which he's made amply clear, that women's value is as, you know, is as sexual objects and to be sexually appealing to men. I think he must view a woman who, you know, he views as not holding her husband's sexual attention, that might be one of the worst things you can say about her, and that's what he was trying to reemphasize to the American public. This was not a move on behalf of feminism. This was a deeply misogynistic set of choices that Donald Trump made in an effort to destabilize the woman who is beating him for the presidency.
Yeah. A key defense of the 2005 tape where the future candidate's talking with Billy Bush is, that was a long time ago, and it was, quote, locker room talk. Would you explain how what we saw Sunday night is actually directly connected to the words on that Access Hollywood tape?
Well, I think that what we saw Sunday night is directly connected to the way that Donald Trump has been talking about women throughout this campaign. On Sunday night, the degree to which he was threatening control over Hillary Clinton's being, that he was, for example, talking about how he would go outside of what is of American law to have her prosecuted and jailed should he win the presidency and defeat her, that he kept threatening her with incarceration, that he wanted to sexually humiliate her, that he wanted that the way that he was moving with so much physical aggression around her, behind her, making terrible, hateful faces at her, that all conveyed much of the same aggression toward women that tape conveyed, but it's all over his campaign in 2016. Talk about the fact that he has referred to Megyn Kelly as a bimbo. You know, that just 2 weeks ago after the first debate, when Hillary Clinton presented also sort of years-old evidence that he had been terrible to Alicia Machado, one of the Miss Universe winners, instead of distancing himself from the language that evaluated her based on her weight, he called into a morning show the next morning, just within the past 2 weeks. And called into a morning show and continued to describe a beautiful woman's weight gain as very problematic. That is all of the same sort of things that Donald Trump was saying. In that tape, he's using language that is more foul, than he has used at other times, language that is more degrading. And he is more explicitly describing an act that we understand to be illegal, sexual assault. But the basic premise of what he's talking about, his power over women, is absolutely in line with language he has used consistently throughout his career and throughout this campaign, and with the way that he behaved toward Hillary Clinton on Sunday night during the debate.
Rebecca, can Trump's supporters just not see what's going on here? Or, and this is the really cynical part of it, do you think that at least for some of them, it's actually a selling point to see him act this way?
Yes, it's a major selling point. I think that Trump's sexism, as with his racism, which has been very open, his willingness to call immigrants uniquely criminal, his reference to Mexicans as rapists, his descriptions of African American communities as hellscapes. He has trafficked in tremendous racism and xenophobia along with the sexism. And I think one of the things that we have to begin to reckon with in this country is that those approaches are features. They are not bugs. They are part of what his support is built on. Mm-hmm. And there are people, one of the things that we have to reckon with about the history and nature of this country is that it was built, quite literally, on the subjugation of certain groups of people, on African Americans who were enslaved, on women who were disenfranchised and whose domestic and familial subservience was part of what white male power was built on. And one of the things that's happened over the past century is that those power structures have begun to be upturned. And there's a tremendous resistance to the increasing power of women and people of color in this country. And, of course, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama stand in symbolically as these two individuals, but who carry a lot of symbolic weight as the first black president and the person who hopes to be the first female president. They are carrying the symbolism of the increased power of women and people of color in this country. And a good proportion of this country does not want to see the power structures changed, does not want to see people who used to not have power gain power, does not want to see a sacrifice of what used to be a pretty exclusive grip on power held by white men. And Donald Trump is channeling that resentment and that resistance to this change. And so, yes, for Donald Trump, talking about women as sexual objects who are there for his use, talking about immigrants as criminals, beginning his campaign on the fundamentally racist lie of birtherism and the notion that Barack Obama's historic presidency, whatever you may think about it, is illegitimate. That is what has drawn some large proportion of his supporters to him. It is not. This is why he's not apologizing. He knows that it is his appeal. He is channeling a resistance in this country to the kinds of social to movements by groups of people who used to be subsidiary and are increasing the amount of power that they have publicly, economically, socially, politically.
With women making up more than half the electorate, is there even a chance that this kind of behavior on his part could possibly result in success at the ballot box?
Well, based on current polling, it seems unlikely that he's going to have success at the ballot box. But it is a bet that he is willing to take because he's getting a huge amount of support from men. There are women. I think increasingly we're beginning to see some evidence that Republican women are peeling away from him. But there are always going to be women who support the kinds of ideas, even if it's not in their own direct best interest, who support the patriarchy. That's always been a function of the patriarchy, is that you have women who support and defend it. White women historically have voted Republican. Married women have voted Republican. And you're still going to see women voting for Donald Trump. But I do think the margins are going to be much worse for him with women than they have been for previous Republican candidates. And I think you're going to see historic numbers of women peeling away from him. But that's all just a guess right now. We don't know. This is one of the things that I want to emphasize about what we're seeing right now, is that there's no previous model. We don't know what's going to happen over the next few weeks. We just don't know.
Rebecca Traister is writer-at-large for New York Magazine and The Cut, as well as contributing editor for Elle. She's the author of two important books titled Big Girls Don't Cry, The Election That Changed Everything for American Women, and All the Single Ladies, Unmarried Women, and the Rise of an Independent Nation, which came out earlier this year. We'll link to her article, Trump's One Service Was Exposing the Misogyny of the GOP, from thestateofbelief.com. Rebecca, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your voice and presence in the public media, because you're carrying a message that is absolutely essential, not only for our democracy, but for our morality. And I thank you for doing that in the broad sphere of things, but I also am very grateful that you'd take time to be with us on State of Belief Radio.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I've enjoyed the conversation.